All right, well, thank you all very much for being out this afternoon. My name is Professor Joseph Prudhomme, and I teach in the Political Science Department. In conjunction with two other people on campus as the official pre-law advisors here. Those other two are Jim Allison, the Director of the Career Services Office, and also Andrea Lang. Although, of course, every faculty here is somebody that you can speak to about your interest in law school. I would commend to you also Matt Cabe, who directs the Justice Law Society minor as another excellent resource, and also teaches the Philosophy of Law course. I teach our Constitutional Law and Law and Society courses. So it's just a natural for me to have this opportunity to welcome you, and I'm really thrilled that we have such an excellent panel for us to discuss the issues surrounding law school admission, the practice of law, the future of the law. We really do have a star-studded panel here, and I'll just say a little bit about the background of each of our participants. They all have roots here at Washington College. One, I believe, an alumnus. All of them have children who either have attended or are attending Washington College. So there's a connection here, a real family-like relationship. So we're delighted to have James Carll, of course, who is a partner in the law firm of Archer and Greiner, and specializes in the practice area of corporate law with a special emphasis on complex business transactions, has his law degree from Duke University Law School. We also have Dave Fries, who is a partner with the firm of Unruh, Turner, Burke, and Fries, located in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, where he works on issues of trusts, estates, wealth management, wealth preservation, and other areas, including elder law. He has his law degree from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. We also have Barbara Groves Mattox, and she is the Director of Tax Policy and Senior Tax Counsel at General Electric. Her focus is on U.S. tax policy, and she has also worked in Congress, where she worked with the Senate Finance Committee from 1985 to 1988. And lastly, we have Paul Noto, Esquire, all Esquire, who is an attorney in Mamaroneck, New York, and practices in the area of land use law, planning and zoning, environmental litigation, and also issues surrounding real estate transactions, and also some family law issues as well. He has served as the mayor of his hometown and has also served in the state legislature. So we really have a diverse array of people at the very top of their legal careers, and we're so thrilled to have them just for an informal conversation here. Really, the purpose of this is for me to ask some general questions about what it's like to be a lawyer today, what the changing dynamics in the practice of law are, and what we can predict about the future in terms of any continuance of these kind of changes with law school admissions, for example, considerably down in terms of the number of students going to law school. Number of students applying to law school is down almost by half. I mean, it's a very significant change in terms of some areas, at least at the beginning of one's career in the law. So I kind of thought that we divide the questions around kind of a fourfold set of issues. First, talk about the way that our panelists kind of discerned when they were your age whether going to law school and practicing law was right for them. So the kind of process of discerning one's career vocation. And then if you're convinced already, or if we convince you tonight, or if you, throughout your time at Washington College, later become convinced that you really do want to go to law school, really do want to practice law, then we'll talk also a bit about admissions, talk a little bit about issues of finding, if you're convinced that law school is right for you, finding the right law school for you, and things that need to be done in law school to achieve a successful career. The legal job market is tight. So that's a kind of general kind of arc of questions that I think that we'll pursue, but it's really meant to be a free-flowing conversation with plenty of opportunity for back and forth and questions very much from the audience, because we're here to help you, right? We're really here to have this as a workshop about law school and life in the law. So I guess I will just have a very general question that perhaps all of you could chime in on, shall I say. When you were an undergraduate, did you know that you wanted to practice law? Were there classes that helped you to discern that this might be the right career for you? Were there experiences that you had as an undergraduate which really shaped your decision to move forward towards law school? So a little bit about your decision when you were their age, decision-making process at that time in your life. So just go, I guess, straight down the panel.
With myself, I don't know that there was any particular event. For whatever reason, I had wanted to be a lawyer even when I was in high school. Was not very well defined, but I thought that would be something that would suit me. And then as you go through college, obviously you start thinking, what are you going to do after college? I also was very interested in business, and I would have gone into that, but I decided that I really wanted to continue. I didn't want to go out in the workforce right away. I wanted to continue my schooling. Went to law school, and then I found that in many law school classes are related to business. I gravitated to them and realized that this was a way of sort of combining the two aspects that I found of interest: to be a lawyer who was specializing in business, and that's what I really concentrated on. So that pretty much is just how it happened. There's a lot of things in life. It wasn't some great event. It was just sort of an evolution towards it.
I did as well. I knew that I wanted to do it, although I will be quick to tell you that it's nothing like what I thought it would be. And no, I don't think anybody goes to law school thinking that they will be a trust and estates attorney. But I weirdly did, and I came to this conclusion when I was in college, and I happened to see a statistic that said that Pennsylvania, where I practiced law, was the most rapidly aging state in the union. And so I combined the fact that 2 or 3 of the wealthiest counties in the country were in Pennsylvania, and that they were rapidly aging, and I thought that was a good sign for a trust and estates lawyer. Longevity of human beings increased, so my projections were off, but not off by a lot, 7 years or something. So I did really go with the idea that I was going to practice law, and I went with the idea that I would be a trial lawyer. And it was in part taking trust and estate classes in law school. I don't think you're really able to assess what it is that you're going to do till you're there and you're taking those classes. But I moved away from trying cases because I had worked for a judge on a mass murder case for 3 years, and I had worked for the district attorney's office before I even went to law school. So I had this idea that I was going to be a trial lawyer, and then abandoned that once I found out that you could figure out ways to save families millions of dollars of federal estate tax. That was really appealing to me. I know that seems weird, but it got me very excited. So that was my progression.
I would be less than honest if I said I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do when I was your age, coming out of college. So law school seemed to make some sense to me. I was then, perhaps a little more than now, it opened avenues to lots of different career options, a lot of different things to do, and it also struck me as a good process for learning even deeper critical thinking than I had in college. There's a lot of analysis, a lot of thinking, not just memorizing and learning the law, but thinking about how to apply it and how to solve problems. And I was a math major, and that kind of all appealed to me, the problem solving. I didn't know not only for sure that I wanted to be any particular type of lawyer. I had an experience which sounds a little strange in law school. I had a dynamic professor, which isn't all that strange, who happened to be a tax professor. And I just absolutely loved his class. I mean, it was a lot to do with the teacher as much as the subject matter, and became very interested in tax and sort of I've done lots of different types of tax law. I've done, planning, I've done legislative work, and now I do mostly policy work, which I treat more as a school teacher job than anything else. So I think that, for then it was just an option of seeing, exploring other things, because there's so many different things you can do with a law degree. It's not just, I think people make a mistake if they go into it with that idea of a rigid view of what they're going to do with a law degree. I think it's just a way to open a lot of doors to do many different things.
Well, like some of my colleagues, I actually did want to be a lawyer when I was a kid. Not sure exactly why, other than our family was very politically active. So I think I saw becoming a lawyer as an opportunity for public service, which it turned out to be. But when I was in college, I was an argumentative kid, so everybody thought you'd be a lawyer. I was SGA president here. I was president of my fraternity. So I was always interested in that kind of thing. And if you look at most legislative bodies and public service entities, they're often populated by lawyers. So being schooled in the law, and Barbara had a good point, it teaches you a lot of great skills about isolating and honing in on issues, and then being able to be thoughtful about finding a creative solution. And I think that was really one of the things about law school that I thought was very interesting. For those of us who practice, at least from my experience, I will tell you that there is very little you learn in law school that you actually apply sometimes in an actual practice of law. You don't learn how to do a closing or how to handle a zoning application or the kinds of practical things we do every day. Sometimes it's just a very academic experience, but you have to go through it. But I agree very much with Barbara that it is a great entree into all kinds of fields and opportunities, and I learned many of my fellow law school graduates actually didn't practice law. They went into other fields, and we're very happy with that, with the education they got in law school.
Let me follow up on that. Given the rapid increase over the last several decades in the cost of attending law school, how do you think one should approach the question, should I go to law school when I'm not certain that I want to practice law? Now, some law schools are able to provide so-called LIP programs, low income protection programs, so that if you work in an area of public service where your salary is lower, you have a reduction in the amount of debt or the time that you have to pay your debt off. But it's still a considerable financial investment, and to use that degree, as expensive as it is, for something that perhaps might not have as much of a capacity for you to pay back your loans as quickly, is sometimes a difficult decision for students to make now, especially in light of the increase in costs over the last several decades. But if you'd speak a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Well, I think if the question is, should you go to law school if you're not sure it's really right for you, I guess that's a difficult question. I think it's become more difficult in recent years. When I was going to law school, virtually everybody would end up with tremendous jobs and so forth, which is not necessarily the case today. Certainly, it has not been since 2008, which was really kind of a watershed time for law firms. Traditionally, law firms were in a tremendous economic position in that they largely dictated the price that clients were going to pay, and that's kind of flipped now, where corporations such as GE are much more restricted in what they'll pay for legal services, and maybe more discerning in what legal services are. That's a long-winded way of saying that the economics of the profession is a little bit tighter now, and that has led to less hires out of law school. One of the things that Barbara said, I think, is very true, and that is one of the great things about a law degree is that it can lead to many different professions, whether it's business, whether it's in politics, public policy, that it really, the training does more than just teach you to be a lawyer. It teaches a certain way to think and so forth, and that still, I think, has great appeal out there in the economy. So what I would say is I would not tell you to go to law school if it's just a situation you're graduating, you don't know what else you want to do, so you just say, well, I'll spend, this will take 3 years out of my life that I don't have to worry about that. But if it's something that does appeal to you, that you think is right for you, I think that you can still have a very successful profession, whether it's in the law or in some aligned field.
So who here considers themselves to have an entrepreneurial bent? You're interested in business or creating business? Okay, so a few of you. So I'm going to speak to that group, which is only about 20% of the audience. But my wealthiest clients, many of whom have the best quality of life as they define it, are not lawyers or doctors. Or if they are, that's not how they became wealthy. But a number of my clients that were entrepreneurial and built businesses, so that as they were doing things, they also built a business that they could sell, so that they weren't just being paid a lot of money, but they were building equity in a business because they built a business that served some need that made people happy or solved the problem for them. They're the ones that became the wealthiest. Several of them are lawyers who never practiced law. And I think that goes to what Barbara was talking about. As lawyers, if you're paying attention, and I think there's more or less emphasis on this from school to school, there are schools in Pennsylvania, there are law schools in Pennsylvania that churn out what I call fine practicing lawyers. I hire them. They know how to perform functions very clearly, but they aren't entrepreneurial, they're not clear thinkers, they're not strategic thinkers. I mean, they may think clearly about something, but when you're trained at the highest level of law and practice, and if you select a school that you like going to and that focuses on this way of training lawyers, you become really adept at figuring out what problems are and being able to pick them apart and figure out what the underlying causes of them are. And if you could take that one step further and figure out how to solve that problem for somebody, and you have a good entrepreneurial sense and you can become a good business person, that's a very, very, very powerful combination. So look, you could go to Wharton or you could go to Penn Law School, and you could probably come out and be successful in business, but you would have received a very different type of education. But if you're interested in business and the creation of business and solving society's problems from the business side rather than from the public service side, it is absolutely not a crazy thing to think about. But it is training at an abstract level. It's at an abstract level of thinking. It's not practical training like how to take a saw and use it to build that business. But I would encourage it. I mean, I'm very entrepreneurial. I own a publishing company. I speak. I own commercial and residential real estate. And all of that, and probably I made more money and more wealth doing those other things than the direct practice of law. But I did them and had the opportunity to do them and failed less frequently at them because I had trained to be a lawyer. So I hope that's helpful to the entrepreneurial group.
Yeah, I think the cost of law school is obviously vastly different than I think when any of us went to law school. I think when I went to law school, my cost is probably what it cost for 3 years for me to go to law school, probably what it cost you for a semester for college. So it's not a subject you had to think as much about then as you do now. I think that if you really want to go that route, then it's a good thing, could be just to go ahead and do it. I think there are a lot of different ways to explore whether you might like something that. I have a lot of young friends close to you in age who work as tax aides or other staff aides with some expertise in congressional offices. And many of them become much more interested, whether it's environmental, whether it's healthcare, whether it's tax. I mean, I tend to work in those areas, so those are the people I know. Will take, a congressional position on the Hill, which don't pay particularly well, but they give you a great depth of experience and some real subject matter expertise. And many of my friends who are doing that, young friends, they end up going to school part-time. And that's easy to do in Washington because you have a plethora of really good law schools. in the immediate area, and many of them will allow part-time students. So that's one option for people to think about. I will say the job market is obviously tight. I still talk quite a bit to the dean at the law school at West Virginia University, which, by the way, is really looking for women students. And they have kind of gone down the road with a strong environmental program, a strong clinical program, to try to really funnel an expertise coming out of that law school. And I think that's working for some of those. So you might look at different schools of whether, if you have an interest in environmental, look for a school that has an environmental law specialty. Because I think anymore the job market does work better if you have some specialty rather than just even a general law degree. If you've really focused some, that helps too. I probably rambled too much on that, but
No, I can't remember the question. No, I'm kidding. I do remember the question.
law school costs a lot. Should you go?
I think, candidly, if you're not sure, if you're ambivalent, I would not recommend you go to law school, because it's a big commitment, not just a financial commitment, but it's hard. I mean, I personally had a very difficult transition from college to law school, and not just because I partied my senior year at Washington College and couldn't, cope with the strenuous academic program, but it's a huge commitment. It's an emotional commitment. It's something, the old saying, the law is a jealous mistress, as they used to hammer into our heads, in law school. It's not easy, and I think that if you don't have the passion, I'm not sure I'd say it's a great idea to commit 3 years of your life and $200,000 to do that. If you're ambivalent, I might suggest you take a year off and do something, travel or find some other work, and then go back and rethink whether or not this is something you really want to do. But it's when I was in school, a lot of guys, or women wanted to be doctors, and they couldn't get into med school, and they went to dental school, and people that often wanted to go to law school and didn't get in, went to get an MBA, and they had perfectly wonderful lives. My point is, being a lawyer is a big job. It's a responsible job. You have a lot of pressure on you often. At least, those who practice, like when I have compared to my colleagues, I have a small practice. So I'm every day with clients and people with real life problems and day-to-day stuff. And to them, you may think it's not such a big deal, but the reality is, to them, their case is the only case and the most important case. So it can be very stressful. And I think if you're going to make that commitment, you have to understand what you're getting into, and you have to want to do it. The exciting thing is, you're never bored. You learn something new every day, and I've been doing this 30-something years. I love that. I mean, I think that's great. That doesn't mean it doesn't get tedious at times, because it does, but you're always learning new things, but you're also dealing with all kinds of different problems. I think you have to want to do that. I don't think it's something you sort of fall into and say, I have to do this. I mean, it's not like you have to drag yourself out of bed in the morning to go to work. If that's what you're doing, that's really what you don't want to be doing. You want to be thinking, wow, this is pretty cool. Even after 30 years, I enjoy what I'm doing.
Law as a jealous mistress is an interesting point, and I wonder if you would share, all of you on the panel, some of your observations about work-life balance as a lawyer. And raising families as a lawyer, and if you have thoughts about how you have both been so successful in the law and then had a rich family life and life outside your profession.
There's no question that lawyers as a group tend to work very hard. I think part of that is most lawyers, although they will complain about their life and so forth, really enjoy the practice of law, and that's what they enjoy doing. So we have, certainly in our firm, many lawyers who are spending not just their days, but also nights and weekends and so forth. I do think that probably as you get to the younger lawyers, there probably is a better life balance maybe than those of us that came along earlier. But it takes, it really, you want to have a family life, you want to have a personal life, and you want to have a professional life. And as Paul says, that does cause stress, but it's just a matter of managing that. And there's no reason why you can't be a very successful lawyer and be a happy person and have a good home life also. But I will say that if you want to go into the law, you should go in with the expectation that you will be working hard. Hopefully enjoying it, but working hard.
And anytime you have this many lawyers sitting so close to one another, you're going to have disagreements. So we'll have one now. My experience, and then we're both probably right, but my experience is that many lawyers are profoundly unhappy and have real difficulties balancing work and family life. Now that depends on the kind of law you're practicing, but a lot of lawyers in smaller to middle-sized practices who are wearing lots of different kinds of hats. They're trying to manage their firms and get bills paid and pay, and get their bills paid and pay their bills and manage their lawyers. It can be very, very hard. And then there are justified expectations of them in their lives with their spouses and partners and friends and family. And that could be very stressful. I think you've probably heard that theme. I don't know, Barbara, I don't know if you said you were stressed, but everybody else has sort of admitted to some fairly high level of work demand and stress. And a lot of that comes from this work-life balance issue. And I hear a lot of lawyers that I work with say, in moments of real honesty, that they are very stressed by that and unhappy, and many do search at a certain point in their careers to find a way out of private practice. So, well, I'm not saying that to discourage you. There are lots and lots and lots of happy lawyers, but don't expect that you won't encounter times of significant stress and feel unhappiness. You just need to be prepared for that, I think. And that will vary depending on how well you've matched your skill set to the area of law you're practicing.
You know, I'm not convinced it's that different than most other occupations. I mean, it's how you approach it. I mean, everything that my son was explaining, how he just, couldn't. I mean, he's in his mid-20s, find something that he really loved doing every day. And I said, well, dear, they do call it work. And there's a reason for that. I think back, it kind of depends what you're doing and where in your career. And sometimes when I was a young lawyer, both when I was clerking for courts and when I was working on the Senate Finance Committee, my work life and my social life were the same life. I mean, all my friends were my age, and we were all single, and we were all doing the same thing, and we might be there till midnight, especially when a big tax bill was going, but we were having fun, and we were all together, so it never really felt like we were working night and day, even though we were. When I was a beginning associate in a large, sort of nationwide firm, a big firm, and I was sitting there until midnight researching rulings on, sort of some obscure tax item, that felt really like work, and that was hard. But it was a transition in developing the expertise and moving the thing, and I think, so there'll be periods, I think, probably not only in law, in most careers, where you just have to put in the slug hours if you really want to develop the expertise, till finally you can get old and gray like me, and then you can kind of start creating your own balance. Like, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. So, in my situation now, as my boss in Connecticut says, with what you're doing now, you could work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and not get done everything that should or could be done. So pick the things that are most important and get them done, and I don't care how you do it. I mean, ethically, of course, but, or where you do it. If you're doing it on the phone at home, I could care less whether you're sitting in the office. So it's, it varies a lot, but I think any job, you're going to have to go through that building credibility and expertise, whether it's law or anything.
Yeah, I think the stress issue is very manageable. I don't think being a lawyer, I said if you were a brain surgeon, you'd still have a lot of stress, and you're as most of my doctor friends, if they're on call, plenty of things they can't do, and when you go out with them and they can't drink at dinner and things, I mean, they're very stressed out all the time and they're constantly on the phone. So I don't think being a lawyer is any more stressful than any other profession. I think it's a question of how you balance the things in your life that you would normally do. And like anything else, you need to have hobbies, you need not to be all about your work, and I think for me, it was far more stressful being an elected official because that places far more demands on your time. And in fact, because I started very young. I was single. I was 28 when I was elected mayor, it was very odd, I admit, and I was lucky at the time. But I was single at the time, so I got married when I was 30. So my wife marries into it, then we start having children, and you realize when you're an elected official, even when you're home, you're not home. I mean, you're doing things, or you're going to, Knights of Columbus breakfast every weekend, and you're just never around. So I had to sort of make a decision if I wanted to, see my kids grow up. I had to sort of decide what I wanted to do. That's very stressful because every day in the paper, people are attacking you and accusing you of all kinds of heinous things. And that can be candidly more stressful on your spouse than it is on you, because if you're doing this, you have a thick skin, you expect it. If you run for office, you have to expect that and understand that you can't have a thin skin. But I think, I think Dave's got a good point that there are some very unhappy lawyers. I don't think they're unhappy because they're lawyers. I think they're just unhappy in what they're doing, and they don't really know what they're doing, and they're unhappy about it, and they feel that they're, in the hamster wheel and they're not getting anywhere. And I think that's really their fault. I mean, I think you have to accept responsibility for what you're doing in your life. No one's going to make you happy, and if you aren't happy, you have to make the changes no matter what you're doing. But I would say this much, that you do have to sort of have a passion for what you do to do it well. And I think that's, again, would apply to almost anything. And if you are a passionate lawyer, you're going to be a very good lawyer at whatever you're practicing. And I think that's exciting. I think if you have that kind of passion and that kind of commitment to your clients, it breeds success, because your greatest reference is a happy client. You're going to build your business, and then you're going to do other things with it. So I think that I wouldn't steer clear of the law because you think it's going to have a lot of stress, because I don't think it's going to have any more stress than anything else you're going to do.
That's one more question on this general rubric of discerning whether you think you want to become a lawyer. With respect to your specific practice area, what part of your job do you find the most interesting, the most rewarding, and what part do you find the least pleasant?
Well, let me say, in addition to being a practicing lawyer, I'm also chairman of my firm, which is a 175-person law firm. So there's a tremendous amount of non-legal work that I do, and some of that can be quite frustrating, largely dealing with 175 lawyers. But as a lawyer, I'm a business lawyer, and what I find tremendously appealing about that is that a client will come to us with something they want to accomplish, acquiring a business, growing a business, getting financing to be able to do that, and so forth. And you help them accomplish that. And I've had a number of clients who have come in, small businesses that have grown and have helped their community by being taxpayer, by having a number of employers who are taxpayers. And to me, that's very rewarding to be able to see physically actually helping somebody accomplish something that they want. The frustrating things are the things you would assume, dealing with. First off, you have to realize that there are a lot of fairly tedious details about being a lawyer, and that can sometimes be irritating, and the business aspect of it can be too. Running after clients after you've done a great job for them and trying to get paid and so forth is something I think no lawyer likes, and can be quite frustrating.
So I'll now Jim and I are in complete agreement. I love it when clients come to me and they've built a family business, or they've built a business in their community, or they've built wealth somehow, and they want to preserve that. They want to share it through philanthropy. They want to to perpetuate the business, and we can help them do that in a variety of ways by structuring it to minimize the estate taxes when they pass away and to maximize the philanthropic things they're able to do. That's very exciting. Carefully listening to what people tell you they want, and then being able to figure out a way to deliver that to them is rewarding, and they're quite happy to pay for that because you've really helped them to get what they want. So on the frustrating side, sometimes the IRS doesn't always agree with the positions that we've taken, and there's something called the federal estate tax audit. And pretty much if you have a large estate, they're going to audit it, and that means that you've got to talk to the IRS and sometimes tussle. It's both exciting and frustrating, I guess.
I think I've got one of the best jobs in the world. I love my job. I guess it's technically a lobbyist, which probably, some people go, crap, what exactly do you do? But it's really teaching. I mean, I kind of view when I go to talk to a congressional office about what General Electric's view are, it has to be on behalf of our workers and our shareholders and our customers. I mean, because they could care less. I mean, what's good for GE doesn't matter to them. If it's good for the country, then. And sort of, I think the fun part is it's almost like an internal debating society. We actually will get on the phone. We were doing it this morning. What's the right answer? I mean, today's debate was whether if you want to have innovation dominate in the U.S. versus overseas, what's the best way? Should you have a research credit? Should you have a patent box? Do you want to reward trying to do research? Do you want to reward success? How do you make sure that manufacturing stays here? I mean, it's that kind of stuff. And I find just thinking about those things, arguing, talking about it, we have great debates. And I like that. I mean, I like learning and learning new things. So that's probably the most fun of my job. The most frustrating part of my job is probably two things. One is you really have no control over the process. I'll have friends who will occasionally take in a law firm a legislative issue, and they say, how do you do this? You can be absolutely right, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. The process itself is very difficult, and that can be frustrating. The other frustrating thing is the type of work I do. I promise you, every person in the company thinks they know how to do it. So that could be a little frustrating. They'll go, well, why don't you do this? So that's the fun part too, I guess.
Well, I think like most people, you like to know that what you've done was successful. And so for me, I represent people who like to build things. And when I see a bank building go up that I took from a vacant lot through the planning process, and I see it built, and then I hear people say, wow, that's a great building, I feel great about that. Because often these are the same people that are coming to the planning board meetings screaming at me how we're going to destroy their neighborhood because we're building a bank in their backyard. So there is a great sense of satisfaction, particularly also if you operate in a relatively small community as I do. And people actually thank you for the work you've done. When you represent big companies, they expect you to do certain things and they write a check for you. But oftentimes when you represent what I like to say real people, they come in with a case of wine, or they come in with something extra after they've paid you to thank you for doing something that made a difference in their lives. And I think that's one of the things that makes you feel good about being a lawyer, even if it's once in a while when you do a criminal case and you get a kid off who did something really stupid, as kids want to do, and their parents come in and they're very grateful for the fact that you helped their son or daughter escape what could have been a life-changing event. So that's great, and I think that's sometimes when you think, why did I go to law school? This is why I went to law school, to help people, to actually do something for people. The downside, I'm with Jim, that the paperwork with running a business, and I want to emphasize running a law practice is running a business, and you do have to chase some clients for money, you have to pay your bills, you have to deal with the government in terms of payroll taxes and all the forms you have to constantly fill out for the various agencies. That's a real drag, candidly, it's no fun. But from from the standpoint of the law and what's sometimes not so pleasant, I mean, sometimes you do run into a really obnoxious lawyer. And dealing with them sometimes can be very frustrating, because sometimes they're just, being a jerk for the sake of being a jerk. And you get that sometimes, and that's sometimes very unpleasant. But other than that, it's great.
Look, let's say you have decided that this is the right career step for you. Let's transition a bit now to thinking about how best to present yourself to a law school for admission. Based upon your personal experience and also the reflection that you've had over the course of your career and your interactions with younger lawyers, those closer to law school, what general advice would you have for a student who really has said, I do think that law school is the right next step for me? General strategies for putting forth the best application to law school.
I'm so far removed from that, I'm not sure how. I think first off, you need to think about where you want to go, obviously, and a lot of the decision will be similar to when you were applying to college. They'll be looking very much at your grades, so it is important to come out with as high a GPA as possible. They'll be looking at your activities. They'll be looking at things that they think will make their school better, with diversity of experiences and activities and so forth. So you want to play up all of those aspects of your life.
So my insight is kind of dated on this too, except I do know some law school recruiters, and I spoke to them about that in preparation for this. And the advice was not probably surprising to any of us up here. They said, obviously, you need to do well while you're here. They said, we'd rather see focus in activity rather than lots of activity. So some activity in which you really excel and which you can relate to how it's going to be part of your life and affect your life or your career as a lawyer. And they were pretty clear about that. They'll take somebody that's really excelling in something unusual or interesting than somebody that's tried to do 20 things while you were here. So finding your passion in academia is really important, because you have to have good grades. And they also said that there is still reliance on the LSAT. And so, if you want to be competitive, you have to either be a naturally good test taker or you have to do the preparation. But they did say that well-rounded was good. Accelerating in some area that was unique was better than well-rounded. And that they would look for that to be reflected in the activities and the courses you took. I also just came from another undergraduate school where I was speaking with the medical schools, the coordinator for people that were applying to medical schools, and she said much the same thing about what medical schools were looking for. And she said something interesting, that they were placing from this school where I was speaking, they were placing music students, psychology, and philosophy students into medical school. So find something that you are passionate about, which is another theme you've heard discussed up here, and really excel in it and find in it what most interests you, and that will serve you well.
I don't know that I am so far removed from that I don't know if I have any particular expertise. I do know from just speaking generally with the dean at the law school, which I attended, that I think law schools are having somewhat of a struggle because there is a decline in applications for law schools. But at the same time, the law school, to keep its ratings, the American Bar Association ratings, they're not going to reduce the admission standards tremendously to do that. They still want the good GPAs, the good LSAT scores. So I wouldn't take too lightly the fact that there are openings in law schools, because they also have to keep their ratings. But having said that, if someone's really passionate, there's always a spot here or there, not at Harvard, not at Yale, but at good, what I would call below that tier law schools. If I also think there's an opportunity that if you come out of college and for some reason you don't have the grades that seem to be requisite for, or you don't have the LSATs, and you really want to do it, I wouldn't give up either. I would go excel at a work experience and then go later. I know numerous people who've followed that route. But if you have a 4.0 and a real high LSAT score, then you are probably in pretty good shape in today's law school economy, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I also think that one of my small regrets is when I went here, I majored in political science. I don't regret that, but I sort of minored in history. But I don't think I took as many English classes as I should have, and I learned as a lawyer, writing is so important. And what I do, I'm writing constantly. You're writing motions, you're writing briefs, and to be a good writer is such a gift. And I'm okay, but I never felt that I'm like a great writer. And I think if you take a lot of English classes, you're going to be well suited to do well in law school and well as a lawyer. And I also think if you're applying to law school, you need to, on your application, I think what they want to know is, why do you think you'll be a great lawyer? I mean, they want people who are committed in some way to the law. So what is it about you that is going to distinguish you as someone who really appreciates the American legal system, and why it is you want to be a lawyer? And I think if you have, some passion for some element, whether it's social work or something else, or, helping indigent people or whatnot, I think they're going to find that appealing. But I agree with Barbara. I think it's probably, not say easier, but I mean, there's certainly, the applications are down. And I think that's great for you if you want to go, and I think that's something you could take advantage of. But if you're looking at law schools, one thing you might want to look at is what is the rate or the percentage of that school's graduates that actually pass the bar exam. There is a pretty significant hurdle to being a lawyer, which is you have to take the bar exam in the state you want to practice. And states differ. I mean, I went to law school in Massachusetts, and they have the perception was that bar was pretty easy, and I think that 90% were passing. I'm in New York. It was at the time about a 70% pass rate. So it's important to go to a law school that will at least prepare you to pass a bar exam, because that's obviously a big deal if you want to be a lawyer.
Most law schools have that.
Yeah.
But just check.
Yeah, they'll have that statistic for you. Yeah. So you should look at that.
I just have one last question, then I want to open it up to the floor for questions. So, you've discerned that you want to go to law school, you've put forward your best application, and you've been admitted to a number of law schools. Then, following up on your comments, how would you recommend choosing among law schools? You said one factor, is to think about the bar passage rates. Do you want to think also about areas where there are a lot of practicum in your field, or you want to think about regional areas where you'd like to live, and maybe it has a regional prestige if it doesn't have as much of a national prestige? Factors like that. Let's say you've been admitted to a number. How would you go about advising people about the selection process?
Well, I think there's a number of factors to look at, and there's no question that it's a very tight market coming out of law school, getting that initial job. And there's also no question that the higher the prestige of the law school, the easier it will be to get a job. Even then, you need to show that you did well in law school, whatever law school you went to. So I wouldn't denigrate what may be a sort of a false standard, but to the extent there is a perception of an eliteness of a school, that can have an important aspect to you. I also would think that it's better to go to a law school that's somewhere geographically where you want to practice. You'll get to know more people in that area and so forth, and there are natural hiring systems in law firms to use to hire from certain law schools. And also, if you think that you know what area of law you want to practice in, there are schools that will be stronger in those areas, and you should try to research that. And the other aspect is just like when you're coming to college, all schools have a certain personality. It sometimes can be difficult to determine that in advance, particularly with a law school, but you should try to find one that sort of fits what you want.
I agree. I think that's the calculus. You want to be at a school that has the biggest network in the area where you want to be, but that has to the extent you're interested in a specialty and you could be trained in it, you want to take a look at that. I had to decide between a East Coast school and a West Coast school, and they were both great schools, and ultimately I decided I was going to live around Philadelphia rather than in San Francisco, and so I went to Penn, and that happens to have a big alumni network, and they had a great program and things that I thought I was interested in, so it matched all of those criteria. But within a geography, you want to find out what are you going to be trained to do that sounds interesting. You may end up not doing that, but it's worth looking at carefully.
I don't know if I really have anything to add to that, other than I needed a good football team, so, when I was going to law school, yeah. So, I do think, if you're going at the top tier national schools, it's not as important geographically, I think. I mean, they tend to have nationwide networks of people. Below that, the location and the network probably matter more.
Yeah, and I think I would caution against saying I'm going to specialize in something. The same criticism people have about the liberal arts education that, you're not learning a trade and you're not learning how to put round pegs into round holes. The same applies to law school. I mean, you don't know what you're going to do when you get out of law school. So I wouldn't spend 3 years of law school, trying to get into one specialty and then realize when you get out, I don't like this. And so the practice of it is different than the academic part of it. So as a friend of mine, his daughter went to Fairfield University and majored in finance, and she spent 4 years in finance. She got out, she got a job, she hated it, she quit, and she's doing something in the art field now. And the point is she spent all that time in finance. So I think you need to understand that being a lawyer opens up lots of doors for you. And I wouldn't necessarily say, unless you really have this passion that this is all I want to do with my life. And then, as Barbara mentioned, some schools have environmental programs, or they have specialties in tax programs. You can get, there's even post-law school, you get an LLM in tax. If that's your field, I mean, that's great. That's where you can pursue it. But I don't know that I would say to go find a specialty. I think what everyone else said is, if you're looking for a geographic area, at least there's a network of people that will probably hire you, or at least look favorably upon you because you're a fellow alum, the way you would look for alumni of Washington College to hire you around here. So I think that would be a good way of looking at it, as opposed to simply saying, I want to specialize in something.
Well, I think that we should anyone have any thoughts, observations, pressing questions they'd like to broach? Yeah.
What major would you suggest that someone would be lost traction to?
I agree with Paul that English is tremendously important. First of all, I think, in all honesty, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference what your major is. Law school will attract people from every department of a college. But I think that we spend so much time writing. A lawyer spends more time writing than probably any other person, any other profession, and having that background, I think, is very helpful.
I would say also that any class you could take where you're getting experience at presenting and becoming more comfortable as a presenter and organizing your thoughts. So the written part, and now not all lawyers are doing trial work, but if I'm sitting down at a table with 2 or 3 people and working through a family dynamic, that ability to present, to understand, so I like, when I look for lawyers, I like to see that they have the strong background in writing, public speaking. If they've dabbled in psychology, that's usually a good interest to have if they're doing the sort of thing that I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think that I would have a strong bias to a liberal arts education because you do get exposed to so many different things. I mean, I was a math major, and it doesn't have anything to do with tax because I don't do anything arithmetic in tax. It's all policy-based, but it's that thinking process that you have, I think, in sciences as well as in thing. When I was in law school, I took a clerkship for a state Supreme Court justice who sent me a reading list that I had to read before I could work for him, and it was just to make sure that I had read Chaucer and Bulfinch's mythology, and he said all of this literature and this writing was important in how he wanted people to think and experience things. So the writing's important, but it's not so. I tend to think you learn good writing by reading good writing, but.
Yeah, I would say English for sure, because we are constantly writing. I would also suggest you take drama classes because you need to learn how to articulate ideas and be an advocate. I mean, that's what lawyers do. We advocate, and we sometimes have to do it in front of large crowds. We have to do it in front of a courtroom, and there's nothing more nerve-wracking than standing in a courtroom with a judge in front of you who's a real, pill, and you have a crazy adversary screaming at you, and you're trying to articulate your point. So I think if you took some classes in drama as to learn how to do that, will be helpful. And again, not every lawyer does that and goes to court, but the point is you do get into situations in meetings or whatever where you're actually trying to make a point that's you're not in a courtroom. So the command of the language is so critical in being a lawyer. And I think in any kind of law, I don't think it necessarily trial law, any kind of law, if you can command the language, then you can really articulate your point and be a good advocate.
I also would throw in business classes. Obviously I'm a business lawyer, so I'm attracted to that, but if you take a look at most areas, whether it's trust and estates, whether it's most litigation, much litigation has something to do with business, environmental law, which we're very big in. The more you understand business, the more you're able to deal with a number of these issues that come up.
But there isn't a perfect one. I mean, my current boss, who's a very senior officer at GE, she was a classics major. I mean, so.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I was thinking about also doing corporate law, so I was wondering, you think it's benefit to think about MBA and GE at the same time, or just take one or the other and then move to?
Wow. Do both at the same time, that sounds hard.
I can tell you that at Penn, they had the dual major, and I've always regretted not doing it. It was only one more year, but I was so chomping at the bit to get out and work. But it's one of the few things, like you, as you said, I don't have a lot of regrets, but I wish I had done that, actually.
Yeah, and there are programs where they're normally 4-year programs rather than the 3-year program. I think there's something to be said, I think particularly with MBAs, of being out in the workforce before you get the MBA. I think the problem is if you go to law school first to then leave and go back to get your MBA is probably going to be difficult to do for a variety of reasons. So if that's something, and I think those 2 degrees do lend themselves together very well. And if you're able to do it in a joint program, that probably is the way to go.
But it is true. I think work experience for a year before you started that 4-year stretch would be useful. It'll give you something to hang your hat on. It'll all make more sense to you.
Most MBA programs look for work before you can is really a successful applicant. So that's one factor.
As I understand it, law schools are looking more and more to people who have had some time from their undergraduate and done some interesting work. So that's another thing. So it would both be helpful to admission into law school potentially and then a requisite for admission into an MBA program, I think.
I think some law schools too. I mean, I've just from no real research, but just chatting with them, too, think that if you've had work experience sometimes, that's why, sometimes they'll take someone whom they may not have taken right out of school, but they'll take after work experience, is because, I mean, law school, I think, requires a lot of discipline, even more than college, and how you approach your studies. And sometimes if you had a work experience and you think of it, well, I'm going to go to law school as a job, and you actually really work from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, 5 days a week in law school, then you'll put in the hours and do it. So it gives you that sort of discipline on how to approach that type of rigorous study too. You all look so grim.
Pretty easy on us, actually.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that students seek out internships in law firms?
Both instrumentally to enhance one's
Attractiveness to schools for
mission, but then also to get a flavor for the day in and day out.
the work of the law, or not?
I can tell you, my firm really has very limited opportunities for internship for college students. Our summer programs are really aimed at law students, and it's a way of attracting future hires. So maybe other people's experience are different, but
My experience when I was an undergraduate, that there were opportunities to work as an intern at a law firm. It's very unique work.
I think it might drive you away from it.
Right. I wouldn't, yeah, I wouldn't.
Now, if you can get, like in my world, if you can get an internship or a job on Capitol Hill or in a good government agency, you know, you have much more responsibility, and that's a possibility.
I mean, I know that Stacy was saying that she had an internship with a sort of practitioner, I think, a little bit of work.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, but.
But if I was going to a huge law firm, no, I think that would be
I
painful.
worked as an intern in a very large law firm in Texas. I made a lot of copies.
Yeah. I did that as a beginning associate. I made a lot of copies of
So,
it.
yeah, but I think that internships, if they're not specifically in a law firm, but in other areas, really can make you an interesting candidate. But I really take your point, which is to say, if you could get hired back for a second summer from a company that you've interned from, really develop a narrative about yourself around kind of growing competence in a particular area that you can really demonstrate that you've set yourself apart in that area would be helpful for admissions purposes. Right. Any other? Yes, of course. Monica.
Well, I had a question, Barbara. You were talking earlier about different paths, career-wise, folks that went out and worked as, say, paralegals or. So I'm wondering, are there specific jobs that you think lend themselves particularly well to getting into law school for students that maybe aren't taking the path directly after applying directly after college?
No, I don't know. I mean, in Washington, it works real well to have, like government, policy-oriented type jobs, whether it's on the Hill or at Treasury or a government agency or at the Fed. I mean, if anybody wants to, plenty of jobs in that area, in federal regulation of financial institutions now. That sounds really fun. Those type of things. But, I'm sure it varies a lot in different areas. I mean, my brother went to law school. He couldn't get in for a while, and then he was a mining engineer and kind of went the environmental way, and that clicked really well for them. So, who knows?
Well, you talked a little bit about this in terms of the skills that one needs to succeed in law school, discipline, facilities writing. Are there any other elements that stick out to you in terms of things that we need to do to succeed in law school? Kind of reverse engineer your life a bit and say, well, what do I need to do in order to develop those capacities so that I can really succeed if I take the lunch into law school? Talk more about how to excel in law school.
Well, I think first, you have to understand that law school is different than college, and it's kind of a strange mixture. It's technically based. There's a lot of technical aspects to it, but there's also a lot of more subjective things as you're applying that. So someone who is wonderful in philosophy or English or whatever may find it difficult to drill down in sort of the technical aspects of it, whereas someone who in college has majored in physics, for example, where you have very specific rules that always are in place, may find it a little too nebulous as you're applying these rules to these situations, to real life situations. So I think to some extent it's trying to get yourself into that space, into that thinking. There's a certain way of thinking that lends itself to law school, and it's trying to hone yourself into that sort of middle ground.
I would say, I agree with that completely, and I would also say that if you were to develop one skill set that would serve you well, it would be learning to tell a story. I'm constantly telling the lawyers that are working for me, you have to be able to tell me the story. So that could be convincing a judge, it could be convincing a jury, it could be getting people to tell you the story. Like with what I do, I have to know what the story is, and then I have to be able to tell them about all these tax laws in a way that takes what they've told me and gets them where they want to be. And sometimes it's something as weird or dramatic as saying, you've told me you don't really like your son-in-law. If you leave this shore house that's so valuable to your daughter, are you at all worried that she might lose that in a divorce to your ne'er-do-well son-in-law? And all of a sudden they're panicked because they never thought about that before. So just doing anything that helps you to get people to tell you the story and being able to tell them the story, that's very powerful skill set to have when you're both studying law and then practicing law, which are two wildly different things. I know a lot of people that love law school and hate practicing law, and vice versa.
Me.
I mean, it's interesting because, you know, in my day-to-day life, the storytelling is what makes the big difference when you're trying to convey. I mean, if you tell people why it's important to have, you know, to pay the same local tax rate in Singapore that everyone else is paying, they go, well, you should pay the U.S. rate, not the Singapore rate. When you say, well, but if we don't pay the same local tax rate as everything, we can't manufacture turbines in South Carolina and ship them to Singapore because we won't get the deal. And so you have to be able to tell a story. Why does it matter? Why does it matter to the workers in the plant in South Carolina whether we can get a deal in Singapore? So I think that it's really just kind of thinking both for law school and the practice is being able to gather, access information, being able to analyze it, and then being able to convey it back out. That to me is the clear work stream for law school and being a lawyer.
Yeah, law school is a lot different from college, and at least if the first year and a half, at least when I went, it was all required classes. And I went to a small liberal arts school here on the Eastern Shore. And you go into a law school room, there's 100 people in the room, and the professor comes in and he has the names, it's like a seating chart, and they employed then what they called the Socratic method, which means he comes into the room and you were given an assignment to read, a couple of cases, and he's going to, write, the name of the case on the board. He's going to stand up, and he stands at this big podium, and there's 100 people in the room, and he's going to look down and he's going to say, Mr. Noto. And he looks up, and then, of course, you're ready, you're breaking out in a cold sweat. And they'll say, could you tell me what Justice Epstein meant when he said the following in this case? And you have to answer it in front of all these people that you don't really know because you're like a freshman in law school, right? So it's not like you know everybody like you do here. So you have to get used to that, and it comes on fairly quickly. In those first year, by the way, at least again when I went, your entire grade is on one exam, and they broke it down into two, it was 80-20. So you took a midterm on all these 5 classes in December, which was 20% of your final grade, and in May you took a final exam, which was 80%. So if you didn't do well, you're done. So it was very nerve-wracking. The second year, you took some required classes in the first semester, and then after that, you had electives, and then you could sort of take whatever you wanted and whatever. So it's a different academic experience than it is here. And also, in law school, there's not always a right answer, so you're always talking about different approaches, and again, as my colleague said, the story, what's the story here? And then it's not like a math equation where there's always going to be the same answer at the end of the equation. In the law, there are many different interpretations of the law, and that's why it's so much fun, and sometimes you win the argument and sometimes you lose. But at the end of the day, it can be very interesting. But it's different. I mean, you'll like it as a liberal arts person because you went to philosophy class and you got to talk about different things. But it can be different in that you do at the end of the day have to say this is the theory of the case and this is what happened and why. And the structure is different than what you're used to, at least for the first year.
That is that supposedly the smartest lawyers in the country, the Supreme Court, can come after listening to the same facts to wildly, diametrically opposed views of exactly the same thing with a 5-4 vote. So he's right. It's not like there's a single answer. And then you can have dissenting views on that, too.
Any questions, anything anyone wants to ask from the floor? If not, I think I would just like to see if there's any closing remarks or anything that you would like to share with us that we haven't gotten to. If not, I know it's a busy time of the semester. But anything that we haven't been able to get to, you'd like to share?
Not on mine.
I never try to hold an audience, so.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I hope it was helpful, and
Thanks for
I hope
listening.
you all become great lawyers.
Very, very, very fruitful conversation. Really appreciate your taking the time out of your very, very busy schedule to be with us. And if you can, please join us for a reception. Mr. P’10, tell us where that is again. That's in the Career Services, is that right? Okay. The new Career Services building, a beautiful building. So we have a reception there with some refreshments. So you're all invited, and have a little bit of one-on-one time with our guests as well. Ask them some questions directly if you're able to be with us at the reception. Please, before we leave, join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you very much.
And at least speaking for me, Mike knows how to get a hold of me through email, so if you have particular questions, feel free, Mike, to share that.
I'm
Me
sure
as
with
well.
any of us,
Sure.
that would be
Yeah, you're
the case.
welcome to contact me. It sometimes takes a little while for me to get back to you, but